There is a moment you know well. It arrives without warning. You are about to speak in a meeting, or step onto a stage, or walk into a room where something important is about to happen. And in that sliver of time between knowing what you want to say and actually opening your mouth, something shifts. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts, which felt so organized just seconds ago, begin to scatter. A voice rises from somewhere beneath your awareness, quiet but unmistakable. What if you sound foolish? What if they see through you? What if this is the moment everyone discovers you are not as capable as they thought? You speak anyway. You perform. You get through it. But afterward, walking back to your desk or driving home, a familiar weight settles in. You replay the moments where your voice wavered. You remember the points you forgot to make. You wonder, again, why this keeps happening. Why someone with your experience, your knowledge, your track record still feels like they are pretending. If this experience sounds familiar, I want you to know something important before we go any further. You are not broken. You are not uniquely flawed. And this is not a problem that more preparation, more positive thinking, or more willpower will solve. What you are experiencing has a name. It has a mechanism. And once you understand that mechanism, everything changes. In 2019, researchers at the University of Salzburg conducted an unusual study. They recruited 400 executives from Fortune 500 companies, individuals who by every external measure had achieved remarkable success, and asked them a simple question. In critical professional moments, how often do you experience significant self-doubt? The researchers expected moderate numbers. These were accomplished people. They had earned their positions through years of demonstrated competence. The results defied expectations. 83% reported experiencing what the researchers termed performance-triggered doubt, at least weekly. More striking still, the correlation between career success and self-doubt was positive, not negative. The higher someone had climbed, the more frequently they experienced these moments of internal collapse. The study revealed something the self-help industry has largely ignored. Doubt is not a sign of incompetence. It is often a byproduct of competence. The more you understand about a domain, the more you recognize what could go wrong. The more responsibility you carry, the higher the stakes of your decisions feel. The more you have achieved, the further you perceive you could fall. This means the entire framework most people use to think about confidence is inverted. We assume confident people do not feel doubt. In reality, the most capable people often feel it most intensely. The difference is not in whether doubt arises. The difference is in what happens next. Consider what happens in your body during those critical moments. When your nervous system detects a high-stakes situation, it initiates a cascade of physiological responses that evolved millions of years before boardrooms, presentations, or difficult conversations existed. Your adrenal glands release cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases. Blood flow redirects from your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex thought and articulate speech, toward your limbs and major muscle groups. This response made profound sense when threats were physical. When a predator appeared, you did not need nuanced thinking. You needed to run or fight. Your body optimized for survival, not eloquence. The problem is that your nervous system cannot distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a skeptical client, between physical danger and professional scrutiny. The physiological response is identical, and in a modern context, that response works against you. Dr. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist who developed polyvagal theory at the University of Illinois, describes this as a neuroception problem. Your nervous system makes threat assessments below the level of conscious awareness. By the time you notice your chest tightening or your thoughts fragmenting, the assessment has already been made. The cascade has already begun. This is why positive thinking fails. When someone tells you to just be confident or believe in yourself, they are asking you to override a neurological response with a conscious thought. This is like trying to lower your heart rate by wishing it slower. The systems operate on different levels. Conscious intention cannot directly control unconscious physiological states. Every time you try to force confidence through willpower and fail, you are not revealing a weakness of character. You are demonstrating a principle of neuroscience. The approach itself is flawed. There is a particular cruelty in how most people try to solve this problem. They notice they felt anxious during an important moment. They conclude they need to prepare more thoroughly next time. They spend additional hours rehearsing, researching, anticipating questions. They arrive at the next important moment having prepared twice as much. And they feel exactly the same way, perhaps worse. This is because over-preparation, paradoxically, often increases performance anxiety rather than reducing it. Research from the University of Chicago's psychology department found that extensive rehearsal can create what they called preparation dependency, a state where the brain becomes hypervigilant for any deviation from the prepared script. When reality inevitably differs from rehearsal, the nervous system interprets this as threat. Anxiety spikes accordingly. The person who prepared obsessively now feels more fragile, not less. They have unknowingly trained their nervous system to expect perfection and to panic at imperfection. Meanwhile, there is another approach unfolding in different corners of the professional world. In the performance psychology programs at West Point, at Olympic training centers, in the preparation rooms of elite surgeons and trial attorneys, a fundamentally different methodology has emerged. These environments have something in common. Failure in these contexts is not merely embarrassing. It can be catastrophic. A surgeon whose hands tremble loses lives. A soldier whose mind freezes under fire endangers entire units. An attorney whose thoughts scatter in cross-examination loses cases that determine futures. In these high-consequence domains, the just be confident approach was abandoned decades ago. It simply did not produce reliable results. What emerged instead was a systematic approach to training the nervous system itself. The insight at the core of this methodology is deceptively simple. Confidence is not a thought you think. It is a state you inhabit. And states are not produced by the mind alone. They are produced by the nervous system. When your nervous system is dysregulated, when it has detected threat and initiated its protective cascade, confident thoughts cannot gain traction. They slide off the surface of your experience like water off glass. You can tell yourself you are prepared. You can remind yourself you have done this before. But the message does not land because the receiving system is in survival mode. When your nervous system is regulated, when it is operating from a baseline of safety and groundedness, confidence emerges naturally, not as something you generate through effort, but as the default output of a system that is functioning well. This distinction explains a phenomenon you may have noticed in yourself. There are moments when confidence comes easily, when words flow without effort, when you feel clear, present, capable. And there are other moments, sometimes in nearly identical circumstances, when confidence feels impossible, when you are locked in self-consciousness, when every word feels labored. What changed between these moments was not your competence, not your preparation, not your fundamental worth as a person. What changed was the state of your nervous system. The project of building genuine confidence, the kind that remains stable under pressure, is therefore not primarily a mental project. It is a neurological project. You are not trying to convince yourself of something. You are trying to train a biological system to respond differently to specific conditions. This reframe carries significant implications. If confidence is a state produced by a regulated nervous system, then building confidence is not about acquiring more knowledge, perfecting your delivery, or strengthening your self-belief through repetition. It is about developing the capacity to regulate your nervous system under pressure. This is a skill. Like any skill, it can be learned. Like any skill, it improves with deliberate practice. And like any skill, it operates independently of your inherent worth or intelligence. The executives in that Salzburg study were not experiencing doubt because they lacked competence. They were experiencing doubt because their nervous systems were responding to high-stakes situations in the way nervous systems have responded for millions of years. The response was not a malfunction. It was a feature operating in the wrong context. The solution is not to fight this response. The solution is to train a different response. Over the next 9 chapters, you will learn a systematic methodology for doing exactly this. Each chapter focuses on a specific dimension of what I call the confidence architecture, the neurological foundations, behavioral patterns, and identity structures that together produce stable, grounded confidence under pressure. These are not motivational techniques. They are not affirmations or visualizations or positive thinking exercises. They are protocols developed through decades of research in performance psychology and refined through application in the highest stakes environments humans have created. By the time you finish this audiobook, you will not need to convince yourself to be confident. Your nervous system will produce confidence as its default response. Not because you have learned to perform confidence more convincingly, but because you have trained the underlying system to operate differently. The distinction matters more than it might initially appear. Performance confidence, the kind you generate through willpower and effort, is exhausting and unstable. It requires constant maintenance. It collapses when you are tired, stressed, or caught off guard. Grounded confidence, the kind produced by a well-regulated nervous system, is sustainable and resilient. It does not require effort because it is not a performance. It is simply how your system operates. One approach treats symptoms. The other addresses the source. In the next chapter, you will learn the specific mechanism through which your nervous system creates the experience of doubt in high-pressure moments. More importantly, you will learn a 60-second protocol for interrupting that mechanism, a protocol used by combat pilots, elite surgeons, and Olympic athletes to reset their nervous system state in real time. What you are about to discover will not merely change how you think about confidence. It will change what you experience in the moments that matter most. Let us continue. Chapter 2. The Nervous System Reset. How your body hijacks your confidence. Imagine you are standing backstage. In 3 minutes, you will walk through a door and into a room where something important awaits. A presentation, an interview, a conversation that will shape what comes next. You have prepared thoroughly. You know your material. By any reasonable measure, you are ready. And yet, your heart beats faster than the situation warrants. Your palms carry a slight dampness you hope no one will notice during the handshake. Somewhere in your chest, a tightness has appeared, subtle but persistent, like a hand gently pressing against your sternum. You take a breath. You tell yourself to relax. You remind yourself that you have done this before, that you are qualified, that there is no rational reason to feel this way. Nothing changes. If anything, the act of telling yourself to calm down seems to amplify the very sensations you are trying to quiet. This is the moment most people misunderstand completely. They interpret these physical sensations as evidence of a psychological problem. They conclude they are anxious because they lack confidence, or because they have not prepared enough, or because something is fundamentally wrong with how they handle pressure. They resolve to work harder on their mindset next time. But what is actually happening in this moment has almost nothing to do with mindset. It has nothing to do with preparation. And it has nothing to do with whether you are fundamentally capable of handling what comes next. What is happening is a biological event. Your nervous system has detected something in the environment, made an assessment below the level of your conscious awareness, and initiated a protective response that evolved long before humans had language to describe it. Understanding this event, truly understanding it, is the first step toward changing it. In the late 1990s, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges was studying heart rate variability in newborns when he noticed something peculiar. The infants who showed the most flexibility in their heart rate patterns, whose cardiac rhythms could shift fluidly between states, were also the infants who demonstrated the best social engagement. They made more eye contact. They responded more readily to their mothers' voices. They seemed more present, more connected, more at ease in the world. This observation led Porges down a research path that would eventually reshape how we understand the human stress response. What emerged from his work was a framework called polyvagal theory, and its implications extend far beyond the laboratory. The central insight is this: your autonomic nervous system, the system that regulates heart rate, breathing, digestion, and countless other functions below conscious awareness, does not operate as a simple binary between stressed and relaxed. It operates as a hierarchy of 3 distinct states, each associated with different physiological patterns and different capacities for engagement with the world. The first state, which Porges calls the ventral vagal state, is characterized by social engagement. When your nervous system is operating from this state, your heart rate is flexible, your breathing is deep and rhythmic, your facial muscles are animated, and your capacity for clear thinking and effective communication is at its peak. This is the state from which confidence naturally emerges, not as something you perform, but as a byproduct of physiological regulation. The second state is the sympathetic activation state, what most people recognize as fight or flight. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallow and rapid. Blood flow shifts away from the prefrontal cortex toward the large muscle groups. This state evolved to help mammals survive physical threats, and it is remarkably effective for that purpose. It is remarkably ineffective for giving presentations. The third state, often overlooked, is the dorsal vagal state, sometimes called freeze or shut down. This is the oldest response in evolutionary terms, associated with immobilization, disconnection, and conservation of resources. When threat is perceived as overwhelming and neither fight nor flight seems viable, the nervous system can collapse into this state. The experience is one of numbness, dissociation, or feeling like your mind has gone blank. Here is what matters for our purposes. These states are not primarily controlled by conscious thought. They are controlled by a process Porges calls neuroception, the nervous system's continuous, unconscious scanning of the environment for cues of safety or danger. By the time you become aware that your heart is racing or your thoughts are scattering, the state shift has already occurred. The biological event has already been initiated. This is why telling yourself to calm down fails so consistently. You are attempting to use a conscious process to override an unconscious one. You are trying to use language to regulate a system that predates language by millions of years. The attempt is not merely ineffective. It often backfires. When you notice an unwanted physiological state and then fail to change it through conscious effort, your nervous system can interpret this failure as additional evidence of threat. The very act of trying to force calm can deepen the dysregulation. There is a structure inside your body that most people have never heard of, despite the fact that it influences nearly every aspect of how you experience the world. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the human body. It originates in the brainstem and wanders. The word vagus comes from the Latin for wandering, through virtually every major organ system. It connects the brain to the heart, the lungs, the digestive tract, and numerous other structures. It is the primary channel through which the brain and body communicate about matters of safety and threat. The tone of your vagus nerve, how active and responsive it is, correlates with your capacity to shift between nervous system states. People with high vagal tone can move fluidly from activation back to regulation. They recover quickly from stressful events. They maintain access to clear thinking even when circumstances are challenging. People with low vagal tone tend to get stuck. Once their nervous system shifts into a stress response, they remain there longer. They ruminate after difficult interactions. They carry tension in their body's hours after the triggering event has passed. Under pressure, they are more likely to lose access to the ventral vagal state where confident, grounded presence lives. Here is the crucial insight. Vagal tone is not fixed. It is not a trait you either have or lack. It is a capacity that can be trained and developed. The nervous system is not a static machine. It is a dynamic, adaptive system that responds to repeated experience. This means the question is not whether you are someone who gets nervous under pressure. Most people do. The question is whether you can train your nervous system to return to regulation quickly, to maintain access to the state from which confidence emerges even when external circumstances are challenging. The answer, supported by 3 decades of research, is yes. But the training does not happen through mindset work. It happens through direct physiological intervention. What I am about to share with you is a protocol. It takes approximately 60 seconds to complete. It works not by changing your thoughts about a situation, but by sending signals through your vagus nerve that shift your nervous system state directly. This protocol is used by combat pilots who must maintain cognitive clarity while their aircraft is being targeted. It is used by surgeons who must keep their hands steady during procedures where millimeters determine outcomes. It is used by hostage negotiators who must think clearly and speak precisely in situations where lives depend on their words. It works because it bypasses the conscious mind entirely. It communicates with the nervous system in the language the nervous system understands: physiology. The protocol has three components, each targeting a different pathway to vagal activation. The first component is a specific breathing pattern. You inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. You hold briefly at the top, just for a moment of suspension. Then you exhale through your mouth for a count of 8. The exhale is twice as long as the inhale. This ratio is not arbitrary. Extended exhalation activates the parasympathetic branch of your nervous system, the branch associated with rest, recovery, and the ventral vagal state. 3 breath cycles of this pattern, taking approximately 30 seconds, begin to shift your physiological baseline. The second component is physical grounding. While continuing the breathing pattern, you press your feet firmly into the floor. You notice the sensation of contact, the pressure, the temperature, the texture of whatever surface supports you. This seems almost too simple to matter, but the nervous system responds powerfully to sensory input related to physical stability. When your body registers that it is supported, that it is in contact with solid ground, the threat assessment softens. You are communicating safety through sensation. The third component targets the vagus nerve directly. You bring your attention to the muscles around your eyes and mouth, and you soften them intentionally. You allow your jaw to unclench, your forehead to release, the small muscles around your eyes to relax. This works because the vagus nerve has branches that innervate the facial muscles. When those muscles are tight, they send signals of vigilance up the vagal pathway. When they soften, they send signals of safety. You can also, if circumstances permit, hum quietly for a few seconds. The vibration of humming resonates in the throat and chest in a way that directly stimulates vagal tone. 3 breath cycles with extended exhale. Feet grounded, sensing contact with the floor. Facial muscles softened, jaw released. 60 seconds. Sometimes less. This protocol does not make fear disappear. That is not its purpose. Its purpose is to shift you from a nervous system state where confident presence is physiologically impossible to a state where it becomes accessible. It creates the internal conditions from which clear thinking, effective communication, and grounded presence can emerge. The difference between someone who appears confident under pressure and someone who appears anxious is often not a difference in how much fear they feel. It is a difference in how quickly they can regulate their physiological state when fear arises. There is a subtlety here worth naming. When you first practice this protocol, it may feel mechanical. You are consciously executing steps, counting breaths, directing attention. This is normal. Any new skill feels effortful before it becomes automatic. What happens with practice is that the protocol becomes faster and more intuitive. The nervous system learns the sequence. Eventually, a single extended exhale, a brief moment of grounding, can initiate the shift that initially required the full 60 seconds. You are not just executing a technique. You are training a new default response. This is what separates genuine confidence from performed confidence. The person performing confidence is working hard, managing their external presentation while their internal state remains dysregulated. The effort is exhausting and the performance is fragile. The person operating from a trained nervous system is not working at all. Their external presentation emerges naturally from their internal state. There is no gap to manage, no performance to maintain. They appear confident because their system is regulated, and a regulated system produces confident engagement as its natural output. The 60-second reset is the foundation. It is the first skill, the gateway capacity, but it is not the complete architecture. In the next chapter, you will learn why nervous system regulation alone is not sufficient for lasting confidence. You will discover the difference between state and identity, and why someone can be perfectly regulated in the moment and still undermine themselves through the story they carry about who they are. You will learn the protocol for installing what I call an identity anchor, a stable internal reference point that persists even when circumstances challenge your sense of self. The nervous system creates the conditions. Identity determines what you build within those conditions. Let us continue. Chapter 3. The Identity Anchor System. Becoming someone who doesn't doubt. There is a peculiar phenomenon that occurs in the lives of people who achieve significant success. They receive the promotion they worked toward for years. They land the client they spent months pursuing. They deliver the presentation that earns standing recognition from peers they respect. For a moment, perhaps an evening, perhaps a week, they feel the satisfaction of accomplishment. They feel, finally, like they have arrived. And then something strange happens. The feeling fades. Not gradually, the way pleasant memories naturally soften with time, but almost aggressively, as if some internal mechanism is working to restore a previous equilibrium. Within days, sometimes hours, they find themselves scanning for the next challenge, the next milestone, the next achievement that might finally produce lasting confidence. The promotion feels like it was probably luck. The client will likely discover they made a mistake. The presentation, in retrospect, had several weak points that everyone was probably too polite to mention. This pattern has a clinical name. Psychologists call it the hedonic treadmill when discussing happiness, and imposter phenomenon when discussing achievement. But these labels, while accurate, obscure something more fundamental about what is actually occurring. What is occurring is a conflict between two different levels of self-experience. The level of state, which is temporary and fluctuating, and the level of identity, which is persistent and structural. The nervous system reset you learned in the previous chapter operates on the level of state. It creates the physiological conditions from which confidence can emerge in a given moment. But states pass. Moments end. And when they do, something else determines whether you return to confidence or collapse back into doubt. That something else is identity. And identity operates by different rules entirely. Consider two professionals preparing for the same high-stakes presentation. The first has spent the week in meticulous preparation. She has rehearsed her talking points, anticipated questions, refined her slides until every element serves a purpose. On the morning of the presentation, she practices the breathing protocol. Her nervous system settles. She walks into the room in a regulated state, physiologically prepared for what comes next. The second has prepared similarly. He too has done the work, anticipated the challenges, regulated his nervous system before entering. From the outside, their preparation appears identical. But beneath the surface, something is different. The first professional, despite her preparation and her regulated state, carries an internal narrative she has never fully examined. The narrative whispers that she is fundamentally someone who struggles with confidence. Someone who has to work harder than others to appear competent. Someone who, despite her achievements, is probably not quite as capable as people seem to think. The second professional carries a different narrative. Not one of arrogance or inflated self-regard, but a quiet, settled sense that he is someone who handles pressure well. Someone who has faced difficult moments before and navigated them capably. Someone whose worth does not depend on the outcome of any single presentation. Here is what happens when the presentation begins. Both professionals start well. Their regulated states serve them. Their preparation shows. But then something unexpected occurs. A senior executive interrupts with a challenging question. The room's energy shifts. Suddenly, the stakes feel higher than anticipated. In this moment, the first professional's regulated state begins to fragment. The unexpected challenge activates her underlying narrative. If she is fundamentally someone who struggles, then this challenge is evidence that the struggle is about to surface. Her nervous system, detecting this internal threat assessment, begins shifting towards sympathetic activation. Her thinking becomes less fluid, her words less precise. The second professional experiences the same external event, the same challenging question, the same shift in room energy, but his identity narrative interprets it differently. Challenging moments are simply part of high-stakes situations. They are not evidence of inadequacy. They are occasions to respond thoughtfully. His nervous system remains stable because his internal narrative does not flag the moment as threatening. Same preparation, same physiological techniques, same external circumstance, radically different internal experience. The difference was not in their states. It was in their identities. And identity, it turns out, is not something you are born with. It is something you construct, reinforce, and can deliberately reshape. The neuroscience of identity is younger than the neuroscience of stress, but it is rapidly revealing something important. Researchers at Stanford's Psychology Department, led by Dr. Gregory Walton, have conducted a series of studies on what they call belonging interventions. In one notable experiment, they took college students who identified as struggling academically and exposed them to a simple reframe that the challenges they faced were normal, temporary, and not reflective of their fundamental capacity to succeed. This intervention lasted less than an hour. It contained no study skills training. It provided no practical academic support. All it did was shift, slightly, the identity narrative through which students interpreted their experience. The effects persisted for years. Students who received the intervention showed higher grades, better health outcomes, and greater career success measured a decade later. A brief shift in identity narrative produced lasting changes that no amount of skills training had achieved. This finding has been replicated across contexts. Medical students who were helped to see struggle as part of becoming a doctor, rather than evidence they should not be doctors, showed dramatically better performance under pressure. Executives who were helped to view uncertainty as inherent to leadership, rather than a sign of their inadequacy as leaders, made clearer decisions in ambiguous situations. The pattern is consistent. When identity narrative shifts, behavior follows. When identity narrative remains fixed, behavioral changes tend to be temporary. This explains why so many confidence-building approaches produce short-term gains that fade. They operate on the level of state or behavior. They teach you techniques to feel different in the moment or act different in a situation. But they leave identity untouched. And identity, operating continuously beneath conscious awareness, eventually reasserts itself. The person who believes they are fundamentally not confident will interpret any confident moment as an exception. A good day, a fortunate circumstance, something that does not really count. Their identity filters experience to maintain its existing structure. The person who believes they are fundamentally capable will interpret moments of doubt as temporary. A challenging situation, an off day, something that does not define them. Their identity filters experience to maintain its existing structure. Both filtering processes are automatic. Both operate below conscious awareness. The question is not whether you will filter your experience through an identity lens. You will. The question is what that lens contains. The protocol I am about to share with you is called the Identity Anchor Installation. It is designed to create a stable internal reference point, a felt sense of who you are that persists even when circumstances challenge your confidence. This protocol does not work through affirmation. Repeating, "I am confident," when you do not feel confident creates cognitive dissonance that the mind eventually rejects. It does not work through visualization alone. Imagining yourself as confident without evidence leaves the imagination disconnected from belief. The protocol works through evidence integration. It restructures identity by reorganizing your relationship to your own history. Here is the foundation. Your current identity narrative is not a fact about who you are. It is a story constructed from selectively remembered evidence. The mind does not store experience objectively. It stores experience through the filter of existing beliefs, and it retrieves experience through that same filter. If you believe you are someone who struggles with confidence, your mind will readily surface memories of moments when you struggled. Moments when you succeeded will be stored with less emotional weight, retrieved less easily, interpreted as exceptions rather than evidence. The Identity Anchor installation works by deliberately reconstructing this evidence base. You will need uninterrupted time for this, 15 to 20 minutes when you first learn it. With practice, the core process can be completed in 5. Begin by settling your nervous system using the protocol from the previous chapter. Identity work is difficult to access from a dysregulated state. 3 cycles of extended exhale breathing. Feet grounded. Facial muscles softened. From this regulated baseline, bring to mind a moment from your past when you handled pressure well. Not a moment when everything went perfectly. A moment when circumstances were challenging and you navigated them capably. When something was difficult and you did not collapse. when you faced uncertainty and moved through it anyway. The moment does not need to be dramatic. It does not need to be professional. It might be a difficult conversation you had with honesty, a situation where you held your ground when it would have been easier to yield, a time when you were afraid and acted anyway. Find this moment. Let it become specific. Where were you? What did you see? What did you hear? What did it feel like in your body to be someone who was handling that situation? This felt sense is the anchor, not the memory itself, but the bodily experience of being someone who navigates challenge capably. Now, find a second moment. Different context, same quality. A time when you demonstrated capability under pressure. Let it become specific. Let yourself feel, in your body, what it was like to be that person in that moment. Then a third. What you are doing is not creating false evidence. These moments happened. They are part of your actual history. What you are doing is reorganizing their weight in your identity structure. You are making them more available, more emotionally present, more central to your sense of who you are. The final step is integration. From this state, with these 3 moments alive in your felt sense, complete this sentence. I am someone who. Let the ending arise from the evidence you have just contacted, not an aspiration, not a wish. A statement that these 3 moments, and others like them, support. I am someone who handles pressure. I am someone who moves through uncertainty. I am someone who does not collapse when things get hard. This statement, grounded in actual evidence from your own life, becomes the anchor, not a belief you are trying to convince yourself of, a recognition of something that is already true but has been obscured by selective memory and distorted narrative. The identity anchor does not eliminate doubt. That is not its purpose. Doubt will still arise. Challenging moments will still trigger your nervous system. What the anchor provides is a place to return to. When doubt arises, when your nervous system activates, when the old narrative tries to reassert itself, you have a counter-reference. A felt sense, grounded in real evidence, of who you actually are. Over time, with repetition, this counter-reference becomes more automatic. The identity narrative shifts, not through force or repetition of empty phrases, but through genuine reorganization of how you relate to your own history. The person who has installed a strong identity anchor experiences doubt differently. Doubt becomes information rather than verdict, a signal that the nervous system has activated, not proof that they are inadequate. The doubt is real, but it is no longer the whole story. It is no longer identity. This is the difference between someone who experiences doubt and someone who is defined by it. In the next chapter, you will learn how to apply these foundations, nervous system regulation and identity anchoring, to the specific moments where confidence matters most. You will learn the protocols for high-pressure situations, the meeting where you must speak up, the presentation where you must command attention, the negotiation where you must hold your ground. The capacity to regulate your state and anchor your identity means nothing if it cannot be accessed when stakes are high. The next chapter ensures that it can. Let us continue. Chapter 4, Pressure State Calibration, Performing When Stakes Are High. There is a hallway outside every important room. Sometimes it is literal. A corridor leading to a conference room where decisions will be made. A backstage area before you step into view. A parking lot you sit in for a few extra minutes before walking into the building. Sometimes it is figurative. The seconds between when your name is called and when you begin to speak. The pause after a difficult question lands, before you formulate your response. The threshold moment between preparation and performance. This hallway, whether physical or temporal, is where confidence is won or lost. Not in the room itself. Not in the weeks of preparation leading up to it. In the hallway. In the transition. In the brief passage between knowing what you intend to do and actually doing it. Most people waste this space. They spend it rehearsing anxieties, cycling through worst-case scenarios, or attempting to suppress the nervousness they feel rising. They arrive at the threshold in a worse state than when they entered the hallway. Elite performers treat this space differently. They have learned that the hallway is not dead time to be endured. It is active time to be utilized. The most important calibration of the entire performance happens here, in these final moments before the moment that matters. What follows in this chapter is a systematic approach to that calibration. not a set of tips or tricks. A protocol for ensuring that when you cross the threshold into any high-stakes situation, you cross it in a state from which your best performance can emerge. The year was 2009, and a team of researchers at the Human Performance Laboratory in Calgary was studying something unusual. They had recruited 40 professional athletes, all of whom competed at national or international levels, and they were interested not in their physical training, but in their psychological preparation. Specifically, they wanted to understand what these athletes did in the final minutes before competition. The window between the locker room and the starting line. The hallway. What they found surprised them. The athletes who performed most consistently under pressure, the ones whose competition results most closely matched their training results, shared a common pattern. They did not use the pre-performance window to amp themselves up. They did not use it to review strategy or visualize success. They used it to calibrate. The researchers called this state matching, the process of deliberately adjusting one's internal state to match the specific demands of the upcoming performance. A sprinter preparing for a 100-meter dash calibrated differently than a golfer preparing for a crucial putt. The sprinter needed activation, energy, explosive readiness. The golfer needed calm, precision, steady hands. This seems obvious in retrospect. Different performances require different states. But the insight the research revealed was subtler. Most people do not calibrate at all. They arrive at performance in whatever state their anxiety has produced, and they attempt to perform from that state regardless of whether it serves them. The sprinter who arrives overactivated, jittery with excess adrenaline, loses the precise timing that separates elite from average. The golfer who arrives underactivated, trying so hard to stay calm that she has dampened her engagement entirely, loses the feel for the subtle adjustments the shot requires. Optimal performance does not emerge from a single ideal state. It emerges from the right state for the specific demand you face. This principle translates directly to professional contexts, though few people apply it consciously. Consider the different demands of situations you likely encounter. A high-stakes presentation requires a state of engaged energy. You need enough activation to project presence and hold attention, but not so much that your thoughts race ahead of your words. You need access to your material, but also flexibility to adapt when the room's response differs from what you anticipated. The optimal state is alert but grounded, forward-leaning but stable. A difficult negotiation requires something different. Here, the demand is for centered patience. You need the capacity to sit with silence, to resist the urge to fill empty space with concessions. You need enough distance from your own position to genuinely hear the other party, but enough conviction to hold your ground when necessary. The optimal state is calm but firm, receptive but anchored. A crucial conversation, the kind where you must deliver news someone does not want to hear or address a conflict that has been avoided, requires yet another configuration. Here, the demand is for warm clarity. You need the steadiness to say what must be said without aggression, the presence to remain connected to the other person even as you communicate something difficult. The optimal state is soft but direct, compassionate but honest. These are not the same state. Approaching all three situations with the same internal configuration would be like a musician playing every piece at the same tempo. Technically possible, but missing the essential responsiveness that separates competent from masterful. The protocol I am about to share with you is called pressure state calibration. It is designed to be used in the hallway, the transition space before any high-stakes situation. It takes between 2 and 4 minutes to complete, and it begins with a question most people never think to ask. The question is this: what does this specific situation actually require from me? Not what do I fear about this situation? Not what could go wrong? Not what do I hope to achieve? What does the situation itself, the actual performance demand, require in terms of internal state? This question shifts your orientation entirely. Instead of managing anxiety, you are now preparing for a specific task. Instead of trying to feel confident in the abstract, you are calibrating for concrete demands. Once you have identified what the situation requires, the calibration process has 3 phases. The first phase is discharge. Before you can calibrate to the optimal state, You must release whatever state your anticipatory anxiety has produced. This is not about suppressing anxiety or pretending it does not exist. It is about completing the stress cycle so that the energy does not remain trapped in your system. The discharge can be physical. If you have privacy, 20 seconds of vigorous movement, shaking your hands, bouncing on your feet, even a few jumping jacks, will metabolize excess adrenaline more effectively than any breathing technique. The body is trying to prepare you to fight or flee. Give it a brief outlet for that preparation, and the urgency diminishes. If physical discharge is not possible, physiological discharge works nearly as well. 3 cycles of the extended exhale breathing you learned earlier, 4 counts in, 8 counts out, will begin to shift your nervous system away from sympathetic activation. As you breathe, consciously release tension from your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Let the exhale carry the excess energy out. The purpose of discharge is to create a neutral baseline. You are not yet calibrating toward anything. You are simply clearing the static so that calibration becomes possible. The second phase is state selection. With a clearer baseline, you now deliberately invoke the state that matches the situation's demands. This is where the identity anchor from the previous chapter becomes practical. You recall not just a memory, but a felt sense of yourself in a moment when you embodied the quality this situation requires. If you need engaged energy, you contact a moment when you were fully present and forward-leaning. If you need centered patience, you contact a moment when you held your ground with calm persistence. If you need warm clarity, you contact a moment when you spoke difficult truth with compassion. The felt sense matters more than the visual memory. What did it feel like in your body to be that person in that moment? Where did you feel stability? Where did you feel energy? What was the quality of your attention? Let your body begin to reorganize around this felt sense. You are not pretending to be someone else. You are accessing a version of yourself that already exists, that has already demonstrated this capacity, and you are bringing that version forward into the present moment. The third phase is threshold commitment. This is the final step before you cross from the hallway into the room. You choose a single word or short phrase that encapsulates the state you have calibrated. Clear, grounded, steady presence. Whatever language resonates with the felt sense you have accessed, this becomes your anchor word. Then you do something that may seem small, but carries significant neurological weight. You take one final breath, and on the exhale, you step forward. You physically cross the threshold while releasing the breath, while internally holding the anchor word, while carrying the calibrated state into the room. This linking of breath, movement, and intention creates what researchers call a state-action bridge. The physical act of crossing the threshold becomes associated with the shift into performance state. With repetition, the threshold itself becomes a trigger. Walking through any doorway into any high-stakes situation begins to automatically initiate the calibration you have practiced. There is a component of this process that most protocols miss, and it makes a significant difference in real-world application. Things go wrong. You calibrate perfectly. You enter the room in an optimal state, and then something unexpected happens. The client raises an objection you did not anticipate. The executive asks a question that catches you off guard. The conversation takes a turn that activates your nervous system despite your preparation. In these moments, you need a recovery protocol, a way to recalibrate in real time, without the luxury of a hallway, without the ability to visibly pause and reset. The protocol is called the micro reset, and it takes approximately 3 seconds to execute. The moment you notice that you have been knocked off center, that your state has shifted in an unhelpful direction, you do 3 things in rapid sequence. First, you ground. You feel your feet against the floor, your weight in the chair, the physical reality of your body in space. This takes less than a second and requires no visible movement. Second, you release. On your next exhale, you consciously let go of the tension that is gathered wherever you notice it. Shoulders, jaw, hands. The exhale carries it out. Third, you return to your anchor word, the single word or phrase you selected during calibration. You do not repeat it verbally. You simply bring it to mind, letting it reconnect you to the state you entered with. Ground, release, anchor. 3 seconds. This will not produce the depth of regulation that a full protocol provides, but it will prevent the cascade. It will interrupt the process by which one moment of dysregulation compounds into complete state collapse. It will give you enough stability to navigate the current challenge and then, when the moment passes, fully re-regulate. The professionals who appear unshakable under pressure are not people who never get rattled. They are people who recover quickly. They have trained the micro-reset until it is automatic. The moment they notice dysregulation, the recovery sequence initiates without conscious effort. There is one more element to address, and it concerns what happens after. Most people, when a high-stakes situation concludes, immediately begin analyzing their performance. They replay moments they wish had gone differently. They catalog their mistakes. They compare what happened to what they had hoped would happen. This post-performance analysis often occurs while the nervous system is still activated. The result is that memories are encoded through a stress filter. The mind, still in threat detection mode, disproportionately stores what went wrong. What went right receives less neurological weight. Over time, this creates a skewed evidence base. High-stakes situations become associated primarily with difficulty, with struggle, with falling short. Even successful performances leave residue of inadequacy because the mind encoded them through a dysregulated filter. The antidote is what I call state-first review. When a high-stakes situation concludes, you do not immediately analyze. First, you regulate. You complete the stress cycle just as you would discharge before a performance. Movement if possible. Extended exhale breathing if not. You bring your nervous system back to baseline before you allow your mind to evaluate what occurred. Only from this regulated baseline do you review. And when you review, you begin with what worked. Not as positive thinking or forced optimism, but as accurate accounting. What moments demonstrated capability? Where did you respond effectively to challenge? What evidence did this performance provide that you can handle pressure? You encode this evidence deliberately. You let yourself feel the satisfaction of what worked, not as self-congratulation, but as data. This experience now becomes part of your evidence base. It becomes available for future identity anchoring. It becomes fuel for the next calibration. Then, from this regulated state, with the positive evidence already encoded, you examine what could be refined. Not what went wrong in a spirit of self-criticism, but what could be improved in a spirit of growth. The examination occurs from safety rather than threat. Learning is possible because defensiveness is not necessary. This sequence, regulate before reviewing, encode what worked before examining what could improve, ensures that each high-stakes experience strengthens your confidence foundation rather than eroding it. The nervous system learns that these situations are survivable. The identity narrative accumulates evidence of capability. The next hallway becomes less daunting because the last room went into the record accurately. In the next chapter, you will learn how to apply these calibration principles to a specific challenge that undermines confidence more than almost any other, the moment of decision. You will discover why capable people second-guess themselves even when they know what to do. And you will learn the protocol that ends the cycle of doubt and hesitation that keeps so many people from trusting their own judgment. Let us continue. Chapter 5. The Decision Trust Protocol, Ending Second-Guessing Forever. You already know what to do. This is the part that makes it so frustrating. In most situations where you find yourself paralyzed by indecision, the answer is not actually unclear. Somewhere beneath the cycling thoughts and competing considerations, you have a sense, a leaning, an intuition that points in a direction, and yet you do not move. You gather more information, hoping additional data will transform uncertainty into certainty. You consult another opinion, and then another, as if the right external voice will finally grant you permission to trust your own. You delay, telling yourself you need more time to think, while knowing that more thinking has never resolved this kind of paralysis before. Meanwhile, the decision that would have taken courage at 9 in the morning now requires twice as much courage at 4 in the afternoon. The email you could have sent in 30 seconds has consumed 3 hours of mental real estate. The conversation you needed to initiate last week has grown into a looming presence that follows you into weekends. This pattern is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you lack decisiveness or that you are somehow less capable than people who seem to move through decisions with ease. What you are experiencing is a specific phenomenon with a specific mechanism, and once you understand that mechanism, you can interrupt it. The mechanism is this: you are not struggling to make a decision. You are struggling to tolerate the discomfort of having made one. In 2007, a neuroscientist at the University of Iowa named Antoine Becquerel published research that would reshape how we understand decision-making. Becquerel had been studying patients with damage to a brain region called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These patients presented a puzzling profile. Their intelligence remained intact. Their logical reasoning was unimpaired. They could analyze options, weigh pros and cons, and articulate the factors relevant to any given choice. And yet they could not decide. Give them a simple choice: what to have for lunch, which appointment slot to take, and they would deliberate endlessly. They would generate elaborate analyses that led nowhere. Hours could pass in consideration of trivial matters. Their lives became mired in an inability to conclude. What Becquerel discovered was that the damaged brain region served a specific function. It integrated emotional signals into the decision-making process. Without access to these signals, patients had only logic. And logic alone, it turns out, is insufficient for decision-making. Here's why. Any meaningful decision involves uncertainty. You cannot know with certainty how a choice will unfold. You cannot calculate your way to guaranteed outcomes. At some point, you must move from analysis to action without complete information. This movement requires something beyond logic. It requires a felt sense of enough. A signal from somewhere beneath conscious analysis that says, you have considered sufficiently. You are ready to choose. The discomfort of not knowing the outcome is tolerable. Becquerel's patients had lost access to this signal. They could analyze forever because nothing inside them said stop. The feeling of completion never arrived. What does this have to do with you? You have not suffered brain damage, but you may have learned, through experience, to distrust the very signals that would allow you to conclude. You may have trained yourself, in the name of being thorough or avoiding mistakes, to override the felt sense of enough and continue analyzing past the point of usefulness. Every time you knew what to do and gathered more information anyway, you weakened the signal. Every time you had a clear instinct and sought external validation before acting, you taught yourself that your own knowing was insufficient. Every time you made a decision and then immediately began second-guessing it, you reinforced the pattern that decisions should be followed by doubt. The result is a kind of functional damage, not to your brain, but to your relationship with your own judgment. The signal that would tell you enough has been turned down so low you can barely hear it. The work is not to think harder. The work is to rehabilitate your capacity to trust what you already know. There is a distinction that changes everything once you grasp it. Most people believe that confidence in a decision should come before making it. They wait to feel certain, then act. They want the discomfort of uncertainty to resolve, and then they will move forward. This is backwards. Confidence in a decision comes from having made it, not before. The act of deciding, of crossing the threshold from deliberation to commitment, is itself what generates the feeling of confidence you were waiting for. Consider this carefully. You have likely had the experience of agonizing over a choice, feeling unable to move, and then finally, through deadline pressure or exhaustion or some external force, making the decision anyway. And in the moment after deciding, something shifted. A weight lifted. The path forward, which had seemed obscured by fog, suddenly appeared navigable. This was not because the decision was correct. You did not yet know if it was correct. The shift occurred because you had moved from the liminal state of choosing to the active state of having chosen. And having chosen is a fundamentally different psychological position than still choosing. In the state of still choosing, your mind generates options, objections, alternatives. This is its job. It is trying to help you by surfacing considerations. But this help, uncontained, becomes hindrance. The mind will generate considerations indefinitely because generating considerations is what minds do. In the state of having chosen, your mind shifts function. It stops generating alternatives and starts generating implementation. It stops asking what if and starts asking how. The same mental energy that was fragmenting your attention across possibilities now consolidates behind a single direction. The transition between these states does not require certainty. It requires decision. The confidence follows. The protocol I am about to share with you is designed to restructure your relationship with decision-making. It is not a method for making better decisions in terms of outcomes. It is a method for making decisions cleanly, for moving from deliberation to action without the corrosive second-guessing that erodes confidence over time. The protocol has 4 elements. The first element is establishing a decision threshold. Most second-guessing occurs because no clear endpoint for deliberation was ever set. You begin considering a decision without defining what enough consideration would look like. Without this definition, deliberation expands to fill whatever time and mental space is available. Before engaging with any significant decision, define your threshold. This might be time-based. I will consider this for 30 minutes and then choose. It might be information-based. I will gather input from these 3 sources and then choose. It might be criterion-based. Once I have clarity on these 2 factors, I will choose. The specific threshold matters less than its existence. By defining an endpoint in advance, you create a container for deliberation. The mind knows that consideration is finite. This knowledge changes how it engages with the process. The second element is the 80% rule. This is perhaps the most important reframe in the entire protocol. You do not need to be completely certain to make a good decision. You need to be approximately 80% clear. If you have a strong sense of the right direction, if the evidence leans meaningfully one way, if your considered judgment points toward a particular choice, that is enough. The remaining 20% of uncertainty is not resolvable through further analysis. It represents the inherent unpredictability of the future. You could deliberate for another week and that 20% would remain because it is not a gap in your knowledge. It is the nature of decisions that matter. Waiting for 100% certainty is not thoroughness. It is avoidance disguised as diligence. The 80% rule gives you explicit permission to act on strong but not complete confidence, which is the only kind of confidence that exists for decisions of any significance. The third element is commitment mechanics. When you reach your threshold and have 80% clarity, you do not merely decide internally. You externalize the decision in some concrete way. This might mean announcing it to someone who will hold you to it. It might mean taking an action that makes the decision difficult to reverse. It might mean writing it down with a date and signature. The specific form matters less than the function. You are creating an external fact that corresponds to your internal choice. This externalization serves a crucial purpose. It makes the decision real in a way that internal resolution cannot. The mind can continue debating an internal choice indefinitely. It is much harder to continue debating a choice that has been spoken aloud, acted upon, or documented. The fourth element is the second-guess interrupter. Despite your best efforts, the urge to second-guess will arise. This is normal. The pattern has been reinforced over years. It will not disappear because you have adopted a new protocol. When second-guessing arises, you do not engage with its content. You do not reopen the deliberation. You do not treat the doubt as new information that must be considered. Instead, you recognize what is happening. Your mind is doing what it was trained to do. It is generating considerations because that is its habit. The doubt is not a signal that you decided wrongly. It is a signal that you decided. You acknowledge the doubt without following it. You might even speak to it directly. I notice I am second-guessing. This is what my mind does after decisions. This is not new information. I have already chosen. Then you redirect your attention to implementation. What is the next action required to execute this decision? You engage with that question instead. There is something important to understand about this protocol. It will feel uncomfortable at first. If you have spent years training yourself to deliberate extensively and doubt persistently, acting on 80% certainty will feel premature. Declining to re-engage with second-guessing will feel irresponsible. Trusting your own judgment will feel arrogant. These feelings are not evidence that you are doing something wrong. They are evidence that you are doing something different. Discomfort is the necessary companion of any pattern change. The discomfort does not mean stop. It means you are in the territory where change actually happens. What you will notice, if you practice this protocol consistently, is that your decisions do not become dramatically worse. You might expect that faster, less agonized decision-making would lead to more mistakes. In most cases, it does not. This is because the agonizing was never improving the decisions. It was only delaying them while extracting a psychological toll. The quality of your judgment at minute 30 of deliberation is rarely better than it was at minute 5. The additional 25 minutes bought you nothing except anxiety and lost time. What does improve is your relationship with yourself as a decision maker. Each decision made cleanly, without extended second-guessing, becomes evidence that you can trust your own judgment. Each time you act on 80% certainty and navigate the outcome capably, your identity as someone who decides and moves forward strengthens. Over time, the threshold for confidence lowers naturally, not because you become reckless, but because you accumulate evidence that your considered judgment is trustworthy. The signal you had turned down begins to turn back up. You start to hear your own knowing again. In the next chapter, you will learn a technique for accessing confidence instantly, in real-time situations where there is no opportunity for extended protocols. You will learn the 3-second intervention that can shift your state between one sentence and the next, allowing you to recover presence in the middle of a conversation, a presentation, or any moment where confidence wavers and immediate recalibration is required. Let us continue. Chapter 6. The 3-second reset. Instant confidence in any moment. The moment arrives without warning. You are mid-sentence in an important conversation when suddenly your mind empties. The thought you were building toward vanishes. Words that were forming clearly a moment ago dissolve into uncertainty. You hear your own voice continue, but it sounds distant, disconnected, as if someone else is speaking. Or perhaps it happens differently. You are listening to a question being asked of you, and as the question lands, you feel something shift in your chest. A tightening, a contraction. The question is not particularly difficult, but your body has responded as if threat has entered the room. By the time the question ends and the silence arrives for your response, you are no longer operating from clarity. You are operating from reaction, or perhaps it is subtler still. You notice, partway through a presentation, that your energy has changed. The groundedness you entered with has evaporated. You are still delivering the material, but you have lost connection to it. The words are correct, but the presence behind them has thinned. You can feel the room sensing it too. These moments share a common feature. There is no time for a protocol, no opportunity to step outside and regulate, no hallway to retreat to. You are in the middle of the performance, and something has shifted, and you must respond to what is happening while it is happening. This is where most confidence training fails completely. The techniques require conditions that high-stakes moments do not provide. They assume you can pause, breathe deeply, work through a sequence of steps. They do not account for the reality that confidence most often fractures precisely when pausing is impossible. What you need in these moments is not a protocol. You need an interrupt, something fast enough to execute between one sentence and the next, something invisible enough that no one knows you are doing it, something powerful enough to shift your state in the space of a single breath. This chapter teaches that interrupt. In the early 2000s, researchers at the Institute of Heart Math in California were studying something called cardiac coherence. They had discovered that the heart does not simply receive instructions from the brain. It sends information back. In fact, the ascending neural traffic from heart to brain is significantly greater than the descending traffic from brain to heart. The heart, it turns out, is constantly informing the brain about the state of the body and, by extension, the state of the world. When the heart's rhythm is erratic and disordered, which occurs during stress, anxiety, and emotional reactivity, the signals it sends to the brain are chaotic. The brain interprets this chaos as evidence of threat or instability. Cognitive function is impaired. Access to higher reasoning diminishes. The experience is one of fragmentation and disconnection. When the heart's rhythm is coherent and ordered, the signals it sends to the brain are harmonious. The brain interprets this harmony as evidence of safety and stability. Cognitive function is enhanced. Access to intuition and clear thinking improves. The experience is one of integration and presence. The research team discovered something remarkable. The shift from incoherence to coherence could be initiated deliberately, and it could happen fast, not over minutes of meditation, but in seconds, through a specific combination of attention and physiology. This discovery suggested that real-time state management was possible. You did not need to prevent stress responses from occurring. You needed the capacity to shift out of them quickly once they did occur. The 3-second reset I am about to teach you is built on this research, refined through application in environments where real-time state management is not optional. Emergency rooms, cockpits, hostage negotiations, trading floors, contexts where professionals cannot afford the luxury of extended regulation but cannot afford the cost of dysregulation either. The reset has 3 components. Each takes approximately 1 second. Together, they create a rapid state shift that is invisible to observers and accessible in virtually any circumstance. The first component is ground. In the moment you notice that you have been knocked off center, that your state has shifted in an unhelpful direction, you bring your attention instantly to physical contact. Your feet against the floor, your weight in the chair, your hands resting on the table or holding whatever they are holding. You are not analyzing this contact. You are not thinking about it. You are feeling it. For 1 second, your attention drops completely out of your head and into the sensation of your body meeting the physical world. This works because anxiety and dysregulation live in abstraction. They live in thoughts about what might happen, what could go wrong, what others might be thinking. They do not live in the present moment sensation of your feet on the ground. By moving attention to physical contact, you exit the mental space where dysregulation thrives and enter the sensory space where it cannot sustain itself. 1 second, feel the ground. The second component is release. On your next exhale, and there will always be a next exhale within the span of a few seconds, you consciously let go. Not of everything. Not of your preparation or your intention or your engagement with the situation. You let go of whatever tension has gathered in the moment since you last checked. The most common locations are the jaw, the shoulders, and the hands. These are the places the body armors when threat is perceived. In 1 second, as breath leaves your body, you invite these areas to soften. You are not forcing relaxation. You are simply releasing the grip that has unconsciously tightened. The exhale provides physiological support for this release. The parasympathetic activation that accompanies exhalation creates a neurological window in which letting go is easier. 1 second, release on the exhale. The third component is anchor. You return to a single word. The anchor word you established during the calibration process in Chapter 4, or any word that connects you to the state you want to access. Steady, clear, here, grounded, present. You do not repeat this word verbally. You do not elaborate on it mentally. You simply touch it with your attention, the way you might touch a talisman in your pocket. A brief contact that reminds you of something you already know. This works because the word is not merely a word. If you have practiced the calibration protocol, the word has become associated with a felt sense. It carries neurological weight. Touching it with attention reactivates, even briefly, the state it represents. 1 second, touch the anchor, ground, release, anchor, 3 seconds, 3 components, 1 state shift. The power of this technique lies not in any single component, but in their combination and their speed. Grounding alone can help, but takes time to produce significant shifts. Breath release alone is valuable, but may not interrupt a strong stress response. An anchor word alone is useful, but can feel disconnected without physiological support. Together, executed in rapid sequence, they create a synergistic effect. The grounding exits the mental loop. The release shifts the physiology. The anchor reorients the identity. 3 different entry points into state change, compressed into 3 seconds. There is a subtlety worth noting. The reset does not produce the depth of regulation you would achieve through a full protocol. It does not resolve underlying nervous system patterns or address root causes of confidence challenges. It is not meant to. What the reset provides is recovery. It interrupts the cascade. It prevents a momentary wobble from becoming a complete collapse. It buys you enough stability to navigate the current moment, after which you can more fully regulate if circumstances allow. Think of it as a circuit breaker. When an electrical system experiences a surge, the circuit breaker trips, interrupting the flow before damage occurs. The 3-second reset serves the same function for your nervous system. It does not prevent surges. It prevents surges from causing damage. The professionals who appear preternaturally calm under pressure are not people who never experience internal disruption. They are people who have trained rapid recovery. They have practiced the reset until it initiates automatically the moment dysregulation is detected. The gap between wobble and recovery is so small that observers never see the wobble at all. There is a training sequence for developing this capacity. You do not begin by attempting the reset in high-stakes situations. That would be like learning to swim during a flood. You begin in low-stakes environments and build the pattern until it becomes automatic. The first phase is conscious practice in calm conditions. Several times a day, when nothing is wrong, when you are simply sitting at your desk or waiting in line or riding in transit, you execute the 3-second reset. Ground, release, anchor. You do this not because you need it, but because you are building the neural pathway. In this phase, the reset will feel mechanical. You are thinking through the steps, reminding yourself what comes next. This is normal. Every skill feels mechanical before it becomes fluid. The second phase is conscious practice during mild activation. You begin to notice moments of slight stress, minor irritation, small disruptions, and you use these as opportunities to practice. Someone cuts you off in traffic. An email arrives with frustrating news. A meeting runs longer than expected. In these low-stakes activations, you execute the reset. Ground, release, anchor. In this phase, you are teaching your nervous system that dysregulation can be interrupted. You are building evidence that the reset works. You are also refining your execution, discovering which grounding points work best for you, which release locations carry the most tension, which anchor words produce the strongest reconnection. The third phase is prepared practice in higher activation. Before entering situations you know will be challenging, you remind yourself that the reset is available. You prime the sequence. Then, during the situation, when you notice activation arising, you execute. In this phase, the reset begins to feel less mechanical. The steps start to blur together. What was 3 distinct actions becomes a single integrated gesture. The moment you notice dysregulation, the recovery initiates without conscious instruction. The fourth phase is automatic deployment. With sufficient practice, the reset becomes a reflex. You no longer need to remember to do it. The nervous system, having learned that this pattern leads to recovery, begins to execute it the moment recovery is needed. The gap between activation and reset shrinks until they are nearly simultaneous. This is the goal. Not perfect equanimity, not the absence of stress responses, but recovery so fast that stress responses do not have time to compound. Wobble followed immediately by rebalancing. Disruption followed immediately by return. There is one additional element that amplifies the effectiveness of the reset considerably. It concerns what you do with your eyes. In moments of stress, the visual system tends to narrow. Attention focuses on the perceived threat or challenge. Peripheral vision contracts. This narrowing is part of the sympathetic activation pattern, the system preparing for focused action against a specific target. The problem is that narrowed visual attention reinforces the stress response. The brain interprets the narrowing as confirmation that threat is present. A feedback loop establishes itself. Stress narrows vision, narrowed vision signals threat, perceived threat increases stress. You can interrupt this loop deliberately. During the reset, as you ground and release, you also soften your gaze. You allow your peripheral vision to expand. Without moving your eyes from whoever or whatever you are engaged with, you become aware of more of the visual field, the edges of the room, the space around the person you are speaking with, the wider context in which this moment is occurring. This expansion sends a different signal to the brain. Peripheral vision is associated with safety and relaxation. Predators were detected in the periphery. Open awareness of the edges indicated that no predator was near. By deliberately expanding visual attention, you communicate to your nervous system that the environment is safe, even if the content of the moment feels challenging. The expanded gaze takes no additional time. It is simply added to the ground release anchor sequence. You ground into physical contact. You release tension on the exhale while softening and expanding your gaze. You touch your anchor word. Still 3 seconds. But now with an additional channel of nervous system communication included. I want to address something that may arise as you practice this technique. You may find that 3 seconds feels too fast, that the reset feels superficial, that surely something so brief cannot produce meaningful change. This skepticism is understandable. We have been conditioned to believe that significant change requires significant time, that quick fixes do not work, that anything worthwhile must be effortful and extended. But the nervous system does not operate on the timeline of conscious thought. It operates on the timeline of survival. Threat detection happens in milliseconds. State shifts can happen in seconds. The system is designed for rapid response because in evolutionary terms, slow response meant death. When you execute the 3-second reset, you are not trying to produce deep, lasting transformation. You are working with the nervous system's capacity for rapid adjustment. You are using the same speed that creates sudden dysregulation to create sudden recovery. The depth comes not from any single reset, but from repetition. Each time you practice the reset, the pathway strengthens. Each time you successfully interrupt a stress response, your nervous system learns that interruption is possible. Over time, the cumulative effect of many brief resets is indeed deep transformation, not because any single reset was profound, but because the pattern of recovery became automatic. In the next chapter, you will learn how confidence expresses itself when you are not speaking at all. You will discover the elements of physical presence that communicate authority and groundedness before a single word is spoken. You will learn to engineer your social presence so that confidence is transmitted not through what you say, but through how you exist in space. Let us continue. Chapter 7. Social Presence Engineering. Command any room without saying a word. She had not yet spoken. The meeting had been underway for several minutes when she entered, slightly late, moving through the door with an unhurried pace that seemed almost inconsiderate given that others were mid-discussion. She did not apologize. She did not rush to her seat. She crossed the room as if the room had been waiting for her, found her chair, and settled into it with a quality of attention that suggested she was fully arriving, not merely sitting down. Within 30 seconds, without having contributed a single word, she had become the focal point. Eyes drifted toward her during pauses. Speakers began directing their comments slightly in her direction, as if seeking her approval. When she finally did speak, several minutes later, the room oriented toward her voice as toward a source of gravity. I watched this happen from across the table, and I remember thinking, what is she doing that I am not? The answer, I would later understand, was almost nothing visible. No power poses, no dominant gestures, no aggressive eye contact or space-claiming behaviors. What she was doing was operating from a different internal configuration, and that configuration was expressing itself through dozens of micro-signals too subtle to consciously identify, but impossible to ignore. This chapter is about those signals, not as techniques to perform, but as expressions of a state to inhabit. The distinction matters more than it might initially appear. Performed presence is exhausting and unstable. Inhabited presence is effortless and self-sustaining. You are about to learn how to engineer the latter. In 2005, a team of researchers at Princeton's psychology department conducted a study that would become foundational in understanding how humans perceive one another. Led by Alexander Todorov, the team showed participants photographs of faces for exposure times as brief as 100 milliseconds, less than the duration of an eye blink. After these fleeting exposures, participants were asked to judge the individuals on traits including competence, trustworthiness, and leadership capacity. The remarkable finding was not that participants could make these judgments quickly. It was that their snap judgments predicted real-world outcomes. The competence ratings made after 100 milliseconds of exposure correlated significantly with actual election results. Faces judged as more competent in a fraction of a second were more likely to win political races. This research revealed something unsettling about human social dynamics. We are evaluated before we have the opportunity to demonstrate our capabilities. Judgments about our competence, our leadership, our trustworthiness are formed in the time it takes to blink, based on signals we may not even know we are sending. The implications for confidence are profound. You can be deeply competent, thoroughly prepared, entirely capable of delivering value, and still be perceived as less than you are because your physical presence is communicating something other than what you intend. Conversely, you can enhance how you are perceived not by becoming more competent, but by aligning your physical presence with the competence you already possess. You can close the gap between who you are and how you are seen. This is not manipulation. It is accuracy. You are not creating a false impression. You are removing the interference that prevents your actual capability from being accurately perceived. The first principle of presence engineering is this: physical presence is not separate from internal state. It is a direct expression of it. When someone appears confident, they are not executing a series of learned behaviors that create an impression of confidence. They are experiencing an internal state, and that state is expressing itself through their body automatically. This is why fake it till you make it produces such inconsistent results. You can consciously control the large, obvious elements of body language. You can stand straighter, take up more space, maintain eye contact. But you cannot consciously control the hundreds of microexpressions, subtle postural adjustments, and fine motor patterns that communicate your actual internal state. The result of trying to perform confidence while internally feeling uncertain is incongruence. The large signals say one thing. The microsignals say another. Observers cannot consciously identify what is wrong, but they sense that something does not align. The impression left is not confidence, but effort. Not authority, but performance. The woman I observed in that meeting was not performing anything. Her internal state was one of settled security, and her body was simply expressing that state. Every microsignal aligned with every other microsignal because they were all arising from the same source. The impression left was not of someone trying to appear confident, but of someone who simply was. This means the foundation of presence engineering is not behavioral technique. It is state cultivation. The protocols you have learned in previous chapters, nervous system regulation, identity anchoring, pressure calibration, are the foundation upon which genuine presence is built. Without them, presence techniques become performance. With them, presence techniques become expression. That said, there is value in understanding the specific channels through which presence expresses itself. Not so you can perform them, but so you can notice where your state may be leaking through patterns you have not examined. The first channel is spatial relationship. How you occupy space, how much of it you claim, how you position yourself relative to others. Anxiety contracts. When the nervous system is in a stress response, the body tends to make itself smaller. Shoulders draw inward. Arms cross or press close to the torso. Legs tuck beneath the chair. This is a protective pattern, an unconscious attempt to present less surface area to potential threat. Security expands. When the nervous system is regulated and safe, the body naturally opens. Shoulders settle back and down. Arms rest comfortably at distance from the torso. Legs position themselves with stability rather than tension. The body takes up the space it is entitled to without apology and without aggression. Notice how you typically sit in meetings. Notice how you stand in conversations. Notice whether your body is claiming appropriate space or whether it is unconsciously minimizing itself. The pattern will tell you something about your baseline state. The second channel is movement quality. Not what movements you make, but how you make them. Anxiety accelerates and fragments. Movements become quicker, jerkier, less deliberate. Gestures start before thoughts complete. The body fidgets, adjusts, resettles. This movement pattern communicates internal instability, a system that is not settled, a person who is not comfortable. Security slows and integrates. Movements become more deliberate, more complete. A gesture begins, expresses, and finishes before the next begins. The body is still when stillness is appropriate. Movement serves communication rather than discharging nervous energy. This pattern communicates internal stability, a system that is regulated, a person who is at ease. Notice how you move when you are speaking in important contexts. Notice whether your movements are serving your communication or betraying your anxiety. Notice especially your hands, which often become the primary channel through which nervous energy leaks. The third channel is visual engagement. How you use your eyes, how you receive and hold attention. Anxiety averts and darts. Eye contact becomes difficult to sustain. The gaze drops during key points. The eyes move rapidly between focal points, seeking escape routes, checking for threat. This pattern communicates submission or discomfort, a person who is not sure they belong in this exchange. Security holds and releases. Eye contact is sustained comfortably during connection points and released naturally during reflection points. The gaze is steady without being aggressive. The eyes communicate that you are present, that you are engaged, that you are not looking for the exit. This pattern communicates equality and ease, a person who belongs exactly where they are. Notice your eye contact patterns in professional settings. Notice whether you hold attention when making important points or whether your gaze undermines your words by dropping away. Notice whether you receive others' attention comfortably or whether being looked at triggers a subtle internal flinch. There is a synthesis of these channels that I call the presence triangle. Three elements that, when aligned, produce the quality of physical presence that commands attention without demanding it. The first element is rootedness. This is the felt sense of being connected to the ground, of having a stable base from which everything else emerges. Rootedness expresses through feet that are planted, weight that is evenly distributed, a lower body that is stable rather than shifting. You can access rootedness deliberately by bringing attention to contact with the ground, by feeling the support beneath you, by allowing your weight to drop rather than be held. When you are rooted, you do not need to grip or brace. The ground is holding you. The second element is openness. This is the felt sense of being available, of not defending or protecting. Openness expresses through a chest that is exposed rather than collapsed, arms that are uncrossed, a posture that faces toward engagement rather than angling away. You can access openness deliberately by softening the muscles across your chest and shoulders, by allowing your breath to expand your torso fully, by noticing where you might be guarding and consciously releasing that guard. When you are open, you communicate that you are not threatened, that you do not need to protect, that you are willing to be seen. The third element is verticality. This is the felt sense of being aligned, of occupying your full height without strain or effort. Verticality expresses through a spine that is lengthened, a head that is balanced atop the neck rather than jutting forward, a body that rises rather than sinks. You can access verticality deliberately by imagining a gentle lift from the crown of your head, by allowing your spine to decompress rather than compress, by letting your head float upward while your weight settles downward. When you are vertical, you communicate full presence, complete occupation of your physical self. Rootedness, openness, verticality. Three elements that together create physical presence, not as performance, but as expression of a settled internal state. There is a particular moment where presence matters most and where most people unconsciously undermine themselves. The moment of entry. When you walk into a room where something important will happen, the first seconds establish a frame that influences everything that follows. Enter rushed and apologetic, and you have communicated something about your status. Enter scattered and uncertain, and you have communicated something about your state. These initial impressions are not determinative, but they create a current you must then swim against. The protocol for high-stakes entry has three phases. Before you reach the door, you pause. Not visibly, not dramatically. A brief internal pause during which you establish the presence triangle. You feel your feet. You soften your chest. You lengthen your spine. You take one breath that settles your nervous system. This takes perhaps 3 seconds and is invisible to anyone who might be watching. As you cross the threshold, you do so with deliberate pace. not slow enough to be theatrical, not fast enough to communicate anxiety. A pace that suggests you are moving with intention rather than being moved by circumstance. Your first steps into a room communicate whether you are arriving or intruding. Once inside, you allow yourself a moment of orientation. Your eyes move across the space, not darting, but surveying. You locate where you are going. You acknowledge with brief eye contact anyone whose attention you meet. Then you move to your position with the same deliberate pace. This sequence takes perhaps 10 seconds longer than rushing through the door and scrambling to your seat. Those 10 seconds purchase a fundamentally different impression. They purchase presence. I want to address a concern that may be arising. Everything I have described might sound like performance. Like you are being asked to adopt behaviors that are not natural to you, to pretend to a presence you do not actually feel. This concern points to something important. If you attempt these elements from a dysregulated state, they will indeed become performance. You will be consciously executing behaviors while your microsignals contradict them. The incongruence will be felt even if it cannot be named. This is why the earlier chapters come first. Nervous system regulation creates the foundation. Identity anchoring creates the stability. Pressure calibration creates the access to regulated states under challenging conditions. The 3-second reset creates the capacity to recover when you are knocked off center. The presence triangle is not a technique to layer on top of anxiety. It is an expression of regulation. When you are genuinely rooted, open, and vertical, your body is expressing a nervous system state in which those qualities are natural. You are not performing presence. You are channeling it. The woman in that meeting was not thinking about her posture or her movement or her eye contact. She was operating from a settled internal state, and presence was what that state looked like from the outside. Her body was not doing anything extra. It was simply not doing the contracting, the rushing, the averting that anxiety produces. Your work is the same. Not to add presence, but to remove the interference that prevents your natural presence from expressing. Not to become someone you are not, but to stop unconsciously diminishing who you are. In the next chapter, you will learn how confidence builds on itself through action. You will discover the loop between competence and confidence, why action generates belief more reliably than belief generates action, and how to create a self-reinforcing cycle in which each step forward makes the next step easier. Let us continue. Chapter 8. The Competence-Confidence Loop, Using Action to Build Belief. There is a lie embedded in almost every conversation about confidence. The lie sounds like this. First, believe in yourself. Then, take action. The sequence seems intuitive. Of course you need confidence before you act. Of course you must feel ready before you begin. Of course belief must precede behavior. But consider your own experience. Think of something you now do with confidence. Something that once felt uncertain, but now feels natural. Driving a car, perhaps. Leading a meeting. Having a difficult conversation. Speaking in front of a group. Now think back to when that confidence did not exist. When the activity felt unfamiliar and your competence was genuinely uncertain. Did confidence arrive first, followed by action? Or did you act first, awkwardly and uncertainly, and find that confidence arrived afterward? For almost everyone, the honest answer is the latter. Confidence did not precede competence. Confidence followed it. You did not wait until you felt ready. You began before you felt ready, and the feeling of readiness emerged from the doing. This is not merely an observation about learning curves. It is a fundamental principle about how confidence actually works. A principle that, once understood, reverses the approach most people take and produces results that waiting for confidence never could. In the 1970s, a psychologist named Albert Bandura was developing a theory that would become one of the most influential frameworks in modern psychology. Bandura was interested in what he called self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations. He wanted to understand where this belief came from. What caused some people to approach challenges with confidence, while others approached the same challenges with doubt? The conventional wisdom of his time suggested that self-efficacy should be built through encouragement, through positive reinforcement, through helping people think differently about their capabilities. Change the belief, and behavior would follow. Bandura's research revealed something different. Through a series of carefully designed studies, he demonstrated that the most powerful source of self-efficacy was not what people were told about themselves, or even what they told themselves. It was what he called mastery experiences, direct evidence of having performed successfully. Nothing built belief like action. Nothing changed self-perception like accomplishment. The loop did not run from confidence to competence. It ran from competence to confidence. Bandura found that this effect was remarkably specific. Succeeding at task A built confidence in task A, but did not automatically transfer to task B. Confidence was not a general reservoir that could be filled from any source. It was domain-specific, built through evidence accumulated in each particular area where it was needed. This finding has profound implications for how you approach building confidence. It suggests that the entire strategy of trying to feel confident before acting is not just difficult, but backwards. You are attempting to produce an effect before its cause. You are trying to harvest a crop you have not yet planted. The path forward is not to build confidence and then act. It is to act and thereby build confidence. Not to wait until you believe you can, but to do and thereby discover that you can. There is a reason this principle feels counterintuitive, and it is worth examining. When you lack confidence in some domain, the prospect of taking action in that domain feels threatening. Your nervous system resists. Your mind generates objections. The very lack of confidence creates a barrier to the actions that would build confidence. This is the trap. Confidence is built through action, but lack of confidence inhibits action. If you wait to feel confident before you act, you will wait indefinitely, because the confidence you are waiting for can only come from actions you are not taking. Most people respond to this trap by trying harder to generate confidence internally. They work on their mindset. They repeat affirmations. They visualize success. They try to think their way to a feeling that can only be built through doing. This rarely works because it misunderstands the mechanism. Confidence is not a thought. It is not a belief you can adopt through repetition. It is a felt sense of capability that arises from accumulated evidence of capability. Without the evidence, the felt sense has nothing to stand on. The alternative is to act despite the absence of confidence. Not to wait for the feeling of readiness, but to move forward in its absence. Not to defeat the resistance, but to act in its presence. This is uncomfortable. It requires tolerating uncertainty rather than resolving it. It requires accepting that the first attempts will be awkward, that performance will be imperfect, that the gap between where you are and where you want to be will be visible to yourself and possibly to others. But this discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is the necessary condition for building what you lack. Every person who now possesses confidence in some domain passed through this discomfort to acquire it. There is no path around it. There is only the path through. The protocol I am about to share with you is called the evidence bank method. It is designed to systematically create the mastery experiences that build genuine confidence, while working with rather than against the resistance that lack of confidence creates. The method has 3 components. The first component is evidence architecture. This means deliberately structuring your activities to generate evidence of competence at a pace your nervous system can integrate. Most people, when they decide to build confidence in some area, swing between 2 unproductive extremes. Either they avoid the challenging domain entirely, generating no evidence at all, or they throw themselves into high-stakes situations prematurely, generating evidence of struggle rather than evidence of capability. Evidence architecture means designing a progression. You identify the domain where confidence is lacking. You map the range of possible actions in that domain, from lowest challenge to highest. And you begin with actions that are slightly beyond your current comfort zone, but not so far beyond that failure is likely. If your confidence gap is in public speaking, you do not begin by volunteering for the keynote address. You begin by contributing more actively in small meetings, then larger meetings, then brief presentations, then longer ones. Each step generates evidence that becomes the foundation for the next step. The progression must be honest. Staying only in contexts where success is guaranteed generates evidence, but evidence of insufficient weight. The actions must involve genuine challenge, genuine uncertainty about outcome. What they must not involve is overwhelming probability of failure. The second component is evidence capture. This means deliberately encoding successful experiences so they become available to your confidence system. Most people complete a challenging task and immediately move on. The task is done. What matters is what comes next. But this forward orientation means that positive evidence is never fully registered. It passes through awareness without being deposited in the evidence bank. Evidence capture means pausing after successful action to consciously acknowledge what occurred, not celebrating, not congratulating yourself, simply noting, I did that. That was challenging. I handled it. This acknowledgement takes only seconds, but it transforms an experience from something that happened to evidence that accumulates. It creates a record that your mind can access when generating felt assessments of your capability. Some people find it useful to maintain a physical evidence bank, a document or notebook where completed challenges are recorded. The act of writing creates an additional encoding. The record creates a resource that can be reviewed when confidence wavers. Over time, the evidence bank becomes substantial, a tangible representation of capability that cannot be dismissed or forgotten. The third component is evidence linking. This means connecting past evidence to present challenges so that accumulated capability becomes accessible when it is needed. The tendency when facing a new challenge is to assess your capability for that specific challenge in isolation. You ask, can I do this? And the this is the novel situation in front of you, which by definition you have not yet done. Evidence linking changes the question. Instead of can I do this, you ask, what have I done that is like this? What evidence exists that I can handle challenges of this type? The answer is almost never nothing. You have faced uncertainty before. You have performed under pressure before. You have navigated unfamiliar situations and adapted to unexpected developments and recovered from setbacks. This evidence exists. It simply may not be organized in a way that makes it accessible. Evidence linking means deliberately calling to mind relevant past successes when approaching new challenges, not as a pep talk or positive thinking exercise, but as an accurate assessment of available evidence. You are reminding your confidence system that it has data it may be overlooking. There is a deeper principle operating beneath this method. Confidence is not an assessment of who you are. It is an assessment of what the evidence suggests you can do. This distinction matters because who you are feels fixed. If confidence is about identity, about some essential quality you either possess or lack, then the project of building confidence feels like trying to become someone else. But confidence as evidence assessment is fluid. Evidence accumulates. New data points are added. Assessments update. You are not trying to change who you are. You are trying to generate evidence that allows your own assessment system to reach different conclusions. This reframe removes the existential weight from confidence work. You are not broken and in need of repair. You are simply under-resourced with evidence in certain domains. The solution is not transformation, but accumulation. Every action you take in a domain where confidence is lacking is a data point. If the action demonstrates capability, it is a positive data point. If the action reveals an area for development, it is still a data point. Now you have information about where to focus. Even imperfect performance generates evidence that you can engage with the domain, survive the discomfort, and learn from the outcome. The evidence bank fills not only with successes, but with evidence of resilience. I tried and it was hard and I got through it. I made a mistake and I recovered. I faced something uncomfortable and I did not break. This evidence is as valuable as evidence of smooth performance, sometimes more so. There is one additional element that accelerates this process considerably. It concerns the relationship between action and identity. Each time you take action in a domain where confidence is lacking, you are not only generating evidence. You are voting for a particular identity. You are casting a ballot for the person who does this thing. This concept comes from James Clear, who described identity change as the accumulation of small votes. You do not become a confident public speaker by deciding you are one. You become a confident public speaker by speaking publicly, repeatedly, until the accumulated evidence shifts your sense of what kind of person you are. The evidence bank method can be explicitly linked to identity formation. After capturing evidence of a successful challenge, you add a brief statement. This is evidence that I am someone who speaks up in meetings. I am someone who handles difficult conversations. I am someone who performs under pressure. You are not asserting this identity in the absence of evidence. You are naming what the evidence suggests. The evidence came first. The identity statement is simply an accurate description of what the evidence demonstrates. Over time, these identity statements accumulate alongside the evidence. They begin to form a coherent picture. The question, "Am I someone who can handle this?" begins to have an obvious answer, because the evidence bank contains extensive documentation that you are exactly that person. In the next chapter, you will learn how to address the internal voice that undermines confidence from within. You will discover why self-criticism persists despite being counterproductive, and you will learn the protocol for rewiring your inner dialogue from critic to coach. The evidence bank gives you ammunition. The next chapter teaches you how to use it against the part of yourself that refuses to see what you have already proven. Let us continue. Chapter 9. Inner Dialogue Rewiring. Silencing the critic, amplifying the coach. You would never speak to another person the way you speak to yourself. This observation has become almost cliché in self-help literature, repeated so often it has lost its capacity to disturb. But sit with it for a moment. Consider the actual content of your internal dialogue on a difficult day. The specific words, the tone, the relentlessness. You made a mistake in a meeting, and for hours afterward a voice narrates your failure with a viciousness you would never direct at a colleague who made the same mistake. You stumbled over words during a presentation, and the internal commentary is not, "That was a difficult moment," but "You always do this. You are terrible at this. Everyone noticed. They are probably still thinking about it." If a friend spoke to you this way, you would end the friendship. If a manager spoke to you this way, you would report them. If a stranger on the street spoke to you this way, you would recognize it immediately as abuse. And yet when the voice is your own, you accept it. You may even believe you deserve it. You may have convinced yourself that this harshness is necessary, that without it you would become complacent, that the critic is somehow keeping you sharp. This belief is false, and it is costing you more than you know. In 2012, researchers at the University of California, Berkeley published a study that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between self-criticism and performance. The research team, led by Juliana Brains and Serena Chun, recruited participants and subjected them to a standardized failure experience. Everyone performed poorly on a test designed to be too difficult. What varied was how participants were guided to respond to that failure. One group was encouraged to engage in self-criticism, to be hard on themselves, to not let themselves off the hook. Another group was guided towards self-compassion, to treat themselves with the same kindness they would offer a friend, to recognize that failure is part of the human experience. The researchers then measured what happened next. They looked at motivation to improve, willingness to take on new challenges, actual performance on subsequent tasks. The findings contradicted what most people intuitively believe. The self-criticism group did not perform better. They performed worse. They showed less motivation to improve, more avoidance of challenge, and poorer results on follow-up tasks. The self-compassion group, the group that had been easy on themselves, showed the opposite pattern. More motivation, more willingness to engage with difficulty, better subsequent performance. This finding has been replicated across dozens of studies in the years since. Self-criticism does not enhance performance. It degrades it. The harsh inner voice is not keeping you sharp. It is keeping you small. Understanding why self-criticism persists despite being counterproductive requires understanding what it is actually doing. Self-criticism is not a performance strategy. It is a protection strategy. Specifically, it is an attempt to preempt external criticism by criticizing yourself first. The logic, operating below conscious awareness, goes something like this. If I beat myself up before anyone else can, the external criticism will hurt less. If I have already identified everything wrong with my performance, no one can surprise me with a flaw I had not noticed. If I am my own harshest judge, then other judgments cannot wound me as deeply. This strategy develops early. Children who grow up in environments where criticism was unpredictable or harsh learn to criticize themselves as a form of preparation. The internal voice becomes a simulation of the external threat, a way to rehearse pain so that actual pain is less shocking when it arrives. The strategy is understandable. In certain contexts, it may even have been adaptive, but it carries a cost that compounds over time. The cost is this: you are subjecting yourself to continuous low-grade psychological assault. The cortisol response that criticism triggers does not distinguish between external and internal sources. Your body responds to your own harsh words the same way it responds to harsh words from others. The stress is real. The damage accumulates. Moreover, the strategy does not actually work. External criticism still hurts. And now you are experiencing the pain twice, once from yourself and once from the external source. You have not reduced your suffering. You have multiplied it. The inner critic is not your ally. It is an outdated protection mechanism that has become the very threat it was designed to defend against. The alternative is not positive thinking. It is not replacing harsh self-talk with affirmations or pretending that failures are actually successes. That approach creates its own problems, the dissonance between what you are saying and what you actually experienced. The alternative is what researchers call self-compassionate accuracy, the ability to see yourself clearly, including your mistakes and shortcomings, while maintaining a stance of basic kindness toward yourself as a person. This is how you would treat a friend who made a mistake. You would not pretend a mistake did not happen. You would not offer empty reassurance. You would acknowledge the difficulty, recognize the disappointment, and then help your friend move forward without defining them by their failure. This is the stance to cultivate toward yourself. Not blind positivity, clear-eyed compassion. The protocol for developing this capacity is called the inner coach installation. It is designed to gradually shift the default voice of your internal dialogue from critic to coach, not silencing the voice entirely, but transforming its function. The protocol begins with awareness. For most people, the critical inner voice operates below the threshold of conscious attention. It is the water you swim in, so constant you no longer notice its presence. The first step is to notice. For 1 week, simply observe your internal dialogue without trying to change it. When you make a mistake, notice what the voice says. When you face a challenge, notice what commentary arises. When you compare yourself to others, notice the narrative that plays. You are not judging this voice or trying to stop it. You are simply bringing it into awareness. Many people are genuinely surprised by what they discover. The voice is harsher than they realized, more constant, more specific in its attacks. This observation phase serves 2 purposes. First, it provides data. You cannot transform a pattern you are not aware of. Second, it creates a slight separation between you and the voice. The moment you observe it, you are no longer fully identified with it. There is a you that is watching and a voice that is speaking. These are not the same thing. The second phase is interruption. Once you can recognize the critical voice when it arises, you begin to interrupt its momentum, not by arguing with its content, which tends to strengthen rather than weaken it, by simply naming what is happening. The phrase I recommend is, "This is the critic." When you notice the harsh internal commentary beginning, you label it. This is the critic. Nothing more. You are not trying to refute its claims or convince yourself it is wrong. You are simply categorizing the experience. This labeling technique has been studied extensively. Research from UCLA's psychology department found that putting words to emotional experiences reduces their intensity. The act of naming engages the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate the amygdala's reactivity. This is the critic is not an argument. It is a circuit breaker. The third phase is redirection. After interrupting the critic with labeling, you redirect to a different voice. The coach. The coach is not the opposite of the critic. It is not a voice that says, "You're wonderful" in response to "You're terrible." The coach is a voice that says what a skilled mentor would say, what you would say to someone you cared about who was facing the same situation. You can develop the coach voice by asking a simple question: what would I say to a friend? If a friend made the mistake you just made, what would you say? Probably something that acknowledges the difficulty without catastrophizing. something that provides perspective without dismissing, something that points toward the next step rather than dwelling on the failure. This is what the coach voice offers. Not empty reassurance, grounded guidance. In the redirection phase, after labeling the critic, you consciously invoke the coach. You ask, what would the coach say here? And then you let that voice speak. At first, this will feel awkward, manufactured. The coach voice will not feel as natural as the critic voice because the critic has had years of practice and the coach has not. This is normal. With repetition, the coach becomes more fluent. There is a specific technique within this protocol that accelerates the development of the coach voice. It is called the evidence redirect. When the critic attacks, it tends to generalize from specific incidents to global judgments. You made a mistake in this presentation, therefore you are bad at presenting. You felt anxious in this conversation, therefore you are socially incompetent. The movement is always from specific to general, from incident to identity. The evidence redirect reverses this movement. When you notice the critic generalizing, you interrupt with the labeling technique. Then you redirect by asking, what does the evidence actually show? You made a mistake in this presentation. What does the evidence actually show about your presenting? Well, you have given many presentations. Some have gone well. Some have been difficult. This one had a rough moment. The evidence shows that presenting is a skill you are developing, that you have demonstrated capability, and that difficult moments are part of the process. The coach voice, grounded in evidence, offers a more accurate assessment than the critic. Not a more positive assessment for the sake of feeling better. A more accurate assessment because it considers the full range of data rather than only the data that supports a negative conclusion. This is where the evidence bank from the previous chapter becomes directly practical. The evidence you have accumulated is ammunition for the coach. When the critic attacks, the coach has specific, documented responses. Not arguments, but facts. Not positive thinking, but accurate thinking. There is a common objection to this work that deserves direct attention. The objection goes, but I need the critical voice. Without it, I would become complacent. The criticism is what drives me to improve. This belief is understandable, but incorrect. The desire to improve does not require self-attack. It requires accurate feedback and commitment to growth. These can come from a coach stance just as readily as from a critic stance. Actually, more readily. Consider how great coaches operate. They identify errors clearly. They do not pretend mistakes did not happen, but they do not define the athlete by their mistakes. They maintain belief in the athlete's capacity while being honest about what needs work. They create conditions where the athlete feels safe enough to take risks and fail, because failure without safety produces avoidance, not growth. The inner critic does not create safety. It creates threat. And when the nervous system is in threat response, learning degrades, risk tolerance shrinks, and performance suffers. The research is clear. Athletes who practice self-compassion outperform athletes who practice self-criticism. Students who speak kindly to themselves after failure show more persistence than students who beat themselves up. Professionals who maintain self-compassion under pressure make better decisions than those who attack themselves for errors. The critic is not driving your improvement. It is limiting it. Every resource you spend managing the assault from within is a resource not available for actual growth. The final phase of the inner coach installation is integration. This means establishing the coach voice as the default so that you no longer need to consciously invoke it. The critic will still arise. Patterns built over years do not disappear entirely, but the coach responds automatically. The critic speaks, the coach answers. Over time, the critic grows quieter because its attacks no longer land without response. Integration happens through repetition. Every time you label the critic and redirect to the coach, you strengthen the pathway. Every time the coach provides an evidence-based response, you build its credibility in your own internal system. Every time you treat yourself with the compassion you would offer a friend, you reinforce the pattern. There is no shortcut. The critic had years to establish itself. The coach needs time to catch up. But the trajectory is toward a mind that supports rather than attacks, that guides rather than punishes, that sees clearly and responds kindly. This is not softness. It is strategy. The research is unambiguous. The coach outperforms the critic. Every measure of performance, learning, resilience, and well-being favors the self-compassionate approach. You deserve to be spoken to with respect, even by yourself, especially by yourself. In the final chapter, you will learn how to integrate everything you have learned into a sustainable daily architecture. You will discover how to maintain confidence as an ongoing condition rather than a state you must continually regenerate. You will learn the morning protocol and evening integration that make confidence your default rather than your aspiration. Let us continue. Chapter 10. The Daily Confidence Architecture, Making Confidence Your Default State. There is a difference between having confidence and being confident. Having confidence is a state you access. It comes and goes. You generate it before important moments, maintain it as long as you can, and then watch it dissipate when the pressure passes. It is a resource you draw upon, and like any resource drawn upon, it depletes. Being confident is different. It is not something you access. It is something you inhabit. It does not need to be generated because it is already present. It does not deplete because it is not consumed. It is the baseline from which you operate. Everything in this audiobook has been guiding you toward this distinction. Nervous system regulation, identity anchoring, pressure calibration, decision trust, real-time resets, presence, and inner dialogue rewiring are not separate techniques. They are parts of a single system. This final chapter shows you how to assemble them into a daily architecture that makes confidence your default state. The core principle is simple but often misunderstood. Confidence is built through consistency, not intensity. Most people try to build confidence the way they prepare for a deadline or a vacation, ignoring it for long periods, then pushing hard when it suddenly matters. This approach fails. Confidence, like fitness, is a condition of the system. It is created through repetition, not dramatic effort. Small, daily inputs reshape your baseline over time. The architecture you are about to adopt requires about 15 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening. What matters most is not time, but consistency. Showing up daily, even when it feels unnecessary, is itself a confidence-building act. The morning protocol. The morning protocol has 4 phases. Phase 1, physiological reset. Begin with 3 cycles of extended exhale breathing, 4 counts in, 8 counts out. Briefly scan the body and release tension in the shoulders, jaw, and hands. This regulates the nervous system so confidence work does not turn into anxiety. Phase 2, identity anchoring. From a regulated state, reconnect with evidence of who you are. Recall moments where you handled difficulty or spoke clearly under pressure. Use identity statements grounded in fact. I am someone who moves forward. I am someone who handles challenge. You are not convincing yourself. You are remembering. Phase 3, day preparation. Identify moments in the day that may challenge you. For each one, apply pressure calibration. Ask what the situation actually requires and pre-select the state you want to operate from. Rehearse the state, not the script. Phase 4, intention setting. Choose one way of being to embody for the day, grounded, clear, decisive. State it once, then release it. Let it guide without forcing attention. 15 minutes total. The evening integration. The evening integration has 2 phases. Phase 1, evidence encoding. Scan the day for moments where you demonstrated regulation, clarity, or courage. Capture the evidence. Most people rehearse mistakes before sleep. This practice trains your mind to register capability instead. Phase 2, compassionate closure. Acknowledge moments where you fell short, not with criticism, but with clarity. Extract the lesson, then release it. Do not carry imperfection into sleep. 5 minutes total. This is how confidence stops being theoretical and becomes lived. Not through motivation, but through structure. Not through force, but through repetition. When practiced daily, this architecture quietly reshapes how you meet life, without effort, without performance. Living the architecture. Throughout the day, use the tools you've learned. Reset when activated. Trust decisions before overthinking takes over. Anchor presence under pressure. Redirect the inner critic to the coach voice. Over time, these practices require less effort. Regulation becomes automatic. Identity stabilizes. Confidence stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Confidence is not certainty. It is the willingness to act in uncertainty, not the absence of doubt, but movement despite it. The methods in this audiobook help you organize what is already true. You are always capable. The evidence exists across your life. You simply learned how to see it clearly and access it under pressure. Confidence is not something you earn. It is something you allow yourself to inhabit. You are worth that practice. You always have been.